Today, I have the absolute pleasure of talking to two of the three people behind a recently published paper in the Kinesiology Review Journal, Tim Cacciatore and Rajal Cohen. The paper is actually entitled Potential Mechanisms of the Alexander Technique Toward a Comprehensive Neurophysiological Model. There will be links for you to read the paper and a summary attached to this blog, so you can do that at your leisure. The links will take you through to the alexandertechniquescience.com website, where these papers are lodged. So before we get going with a discussion, which is going to be around the context of the paper and how it sits with previous existing research, I'd like to invite Tim and Rajal to introduce themselves. So just a little bit about who you are and your research background. Tim first, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I got interested in the Alexander technique, 30 some odd years ago when I had a back injury, and I was in grad school studying motor control at the time, and I started looking into reading the literature and trying to find out, I had some Alexander lessons and they helped me with my back, and I started looking at the literature to try to find out what explanations there were, and it seemed like there was kind of a big hole in the literature where the Alexander technique should be. So I went on, long story short, to do a postdoc and had another appointment at Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland after I graduated to start working on postural control. And then I later moved to London at UCL to do some work on mainly sit-to-stand there.
Good, thank you very much. And Rajal, can you do likewise?
I also came to the Alexander technique by way of pain and also around age 20. So we have that in common. I, however, had encountered the Alexander technique long before I went to graduate school. So I actually was on a leave of absence from my undergraduate work. Like, I was majoring in psychology, but I was like, what am I going to do with this? This is expensive. So I was living on a commune in Virginia, but the back pain was getting worse. And I just lucked into an Alexander technique workshop. And I was mesmerized, spellbound. I said, I want that. And from the first lesson, I knew I wanted to be an Alexander teacher. I was like, this is what I've been waiting for. And a few years later, I did that. And so I trained in Alexander technique, and I worked as an Alexander teacher for several years in rural Virginia, before kind of feeling like, kind of like Tim was talking about, I was noticing the hole, but from the other side, like, why does this work? What's going on here? So I figured I'll go to grad school and figure it out. And then at the 2000 AGM, I went to Tim's talk, and he was then at OHSU, and he was just starting his first studies on how the Alexander technique works. And I was like, oh, wow. So I kind of followed him around for the rest of the conference, asking him questions.
I remember that.
I can be very persistent.
No, it was good. It was good.
And at one point I said, is it fun being a neuroscientist? And Tim said, no, I want to be an Alexander teacher. You train to be a scientist. I'll train to be an Alexander teacher. We'll switch. So eventually we both trained in both of those things. But it was, so the kind of germ of this collaboration was 21 and a half years ago, or 20 and a half years ago.
If we could focus in on the recent paper in the Kinesiology Review Journal. I really enjoyed reading it. I think it seems to me it's quite an important paper, coming up with a model as you have done. So I'm really interested in how you see it sits within the existing research. So, the motor control stuff that Tim, you've done a lot of, and just general theories around how the Alexander technique works. So, if you'd like to sort of just start a general discussion about that, and we'll just see where it goes.
Sure. Shall I
Sure.
start? It was really interesting, this question, because we went back and looked at in more detail at some of Jones's writings and Rajal did some of Barlow's writings and so forth. To just kind of, I mean, we all, of course, we know these studies and carry them around with us, but it's different to sort of look back at them after spending a lot of time on a piece of work. And so it was really, really an interesting opportunity in that sense. In terms of where this sits within the body of motor control literature, there's currently, it's kind of at the forefront, really. There's a lot of, I mean, the whole reason for this special issue already was that basically there's a lot of interest in how somatic disciplines work. Both from the editors of this journal, but NIH and so forth in general, there's a recognition that there's something there, and scientists kind of want to know what it is. And so this sort of offers an answer, a potential answer, right? A framework for the Alexander technique, and in any event.
So Tim and I had been planning to spend last summer writing this big overview of kind of postural tone and how it plays an important role in somatic practices more broadly. That was our plan for the summer. And then David Anderson contacted me and said, hey, we need somebody to write, something about how the Alexander technique works for this special issue. And I think you'd be well positioned to do that. And I had a short deadline. And David, of course, was thrilled to have Tim join me on this. And then Patrick came along because he and Tim had been having so many conversations along the way.
So how did it start to take shape then? Because it's such a big question. And did you plan to come up with a model, or was it just like it sort of grew out of what you were aiming to do for that question that you were posed by the journal?
I'm not sure where we started. I mean, we spent a long time basically going back and forth, and we basically met once a week for the good part of a year. And we started we did start actually trying to come up with a model at the end, and it was awful. We weren't getting anywhere, and we're drawing a brain with lots of arrows going through it, and at one point we just had to throw it out and just write something very simple about what was the core of what we're talking about, and what does the data suggest. It grew from that. It was fairly easy from that point onward.
There were a lot
at least
of
there was a path, right?
Yeah.
A lot of restarts, but I think they were all important, right? It's not like we could have just written the first thing without having written the ones where we read it. Like it started to become like 20 pages long, and we just kept on finding more details we had to fill in, and we were like, no.
Yes.
Yeah. We were like trying to describe describe it in the context of a lesson. That was the framework that just kept ballooning and becoming out of control. Yeah.
No, wow. Yeah, I mean, I just have this idea of you just getting more and more excited as you kind of work towards this. I think we've got something coming out here. This may be.
I think it was probably more fear of a looming deadline, really. But yeah, I mean, of course we're excited, we think that the framework is good. You can explain a lot, whether it needs a lot more data to be taken to directly study some of the proposals, but it's a reasonable theoretic framework given the data, I think. Yeah.
I think some of the breakthroughs came when we realized those figures that we actually came up with. I remember being very, very excited. We have two real figures because we have.
You mean toward the end, the simple one with like, yeah.
Both of them, but yeah, especially the simple one. Yeah.
The simple one with tone and a body schema in the center with just a few arrows, to various things, and I think that was kind of a simplifying moment.
Yeah, it's kind of like you've got all this complexity, and then you've gone, oh, but it can just look like this. Oh yeah.
Core here, yeah.
There hasn't been an awful lot about how the Alexander technique works, and I think you say in the paper, it may be in Andrew McCann's summary, that actually it hasn't been possible because the technology isn't there to actually study how the Alexander's technique really works. So this paper is of its time, isn't it? It's coming to the point where this can start to be explored, because it's possible to, which is quite exciting. I think there have been other theories, presumably, but none of them are kind of quite as quite backed up as with the research as yours is.
Yes,
So,
I agree.
any
I mean,
thoughts?
really, Frank Pierce Jones was the one who did the most, right? And that was quite a long time ago. 55 years ago. Really, really a long time.
Yeah. I mean, the field of motor control was in its infancy back then.
There was no sit-to-stand literature.
Yeah,
He literally wrote
is
the
really
first paper
interesting.
on rising from a chair. And now it's this huge body of literature. His work isn't cited in it because it was like, why are you doing all these complicated things? Right. So now we have that literature. We have like the concept of postural tone has been elaborated. Jones mentioned it in his work as an idea.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a hand waving, like, maybe this probably has something to do with postural tone.
Right.
And then maybe it works like this or that, and we don't really know.
Well, they had no way of testing it.
No quantitative data. Yeah.
And Barlow, to give credit, Barlow talked a fair bit about body schema.
Oh, right.
So those are kind of the two things that we're talking about as key, right? So Jones did mention postural tone, and Barlow did talk about body schema. So we didn't like make up these core elements out of whole cloth, right? The ideas have been out there, but we were gathering the data and putting them together and really elaborating on especially postural tone, which Tim, of course, has done a lot of work with Victor Gerfinkel on thinking this part through in particular. Yeah.
But the body schema is probably the most difficult bit to actually study.
I sort of think so, because it's the brain's idea of where the body is in space. So it's a completely central representation. And how do you get at that? And people have techniques, but it's sort of subtle thing.
And the techniques tend to be applied to things like which direction is your hand facing, right? These very simple kind of gross things, whereas the kind of aspects of body schema that we're talking about in Alexander's technique are much more subtle. Yeah. Right? It's like, how are you feeling about your rib cage relating to your knees?
But it's definitely something we'd like to get some more data on, or someone, we would like to see more studies on or some studies really on body schema and the technique. That would be really interesting.
There's a new PhD who's looking at mental imagery, which is, of course, has some overlap with what we do, although we often talk about how we're different, but there's some overlap. And he has a paper entitled Draw Me a Pelvis. So he's talking about how after mental imagery, people, in this case with Parkinson's disease, were better able to understand how their pelvis worked and to draw it. So drawing is one way to try to get a body schema. Yeah. Obviously, that's going to be it's not going to get at the dynamic aspects that we know are so important, but it's one tool. It's one way in.
Yes, that's sort of. Yeah.
But of course, we know you can have wonderful anatomical knowledge, but not have the ability to apply it to yourself.
Yes. Well, I look forward to, and that's one of my biggest questions about any paper. The interesting bit is what comes next. I'd love to have you back and to talk that through, just to see what's next on your horizons.
We'd love to talk about that.
Sounds like fun. Yeah,
that'd be great.
That Andrew Putnam McCann's summary is available on the website. It's a lot shorter than the paper. It's a lot quicker to get through, and it really does hit all the important points. Yes. So if you're not up for reading an academic journal, or even if you fully intend to read the article, I would start with Andrew's summary.
I think that will, we could obviously talk for some time about all of this, but I think we probably better finish. Okay. So I'd just like to thank you ever so much for giving me your time and expertise. And I will look forward to inviting you to another discussion in due course. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to it.